Alright, so in here is everything you need to hike across the desert and make a documentary. So this is going to be part pack breakdown and part backpacking film gear breakdown, I guess. Kind of a unique niche here. And because of that, this is not your ultralight backpacking setup. If you're looking for that, you're going to have to go somewhere else. So to start off, the pack, it's a pretty big pack, probably a lot bigger than most people would recommend for a thru hike. But for what I do, it's kind of useful because I can use the extra space. Let's start with the top pouch here. I usually don't keep a whole lot up here. One thing I always keep is a double bagged, gallon sized Ziploc bag in here. And this is just kind of where I keep all my paper stuff like maps and my notebook, stuff like that. It's easy to get to, and if it rains or whatever, I can always zip these up and fold it over, and that usually works pretty good to waterproof stuff. And then just my headlamp. I usually keep one of these side pouches open because that's where my tripod goes, and it's really handy to have my tripod on one of these sides because then I can take it off without having to take my backpack off, and I can just set up my camera real quick without having to really stop. And when I'm hiking, my camera lives on this clip right here. So I have my camera and my tripod out and accessible all the time. Unless of course it's raining, then I have to put stuff away, but that wasn't really a problem on the Hayduke. For most thru hikers, this thing is probably overkill. You don't really need something like this, but for me, because I'm using my camera so often, this thing was a total game changer. This is the Peak Design camera clip, and the tripod block that goes on my camera fits into here, and it also fits into my tripod. So it's really, really handy to just slip my camera between this and the tripod, and then my camera is always accessible. Now I'm filming this with my phone, but this is my camera setup that I was using on the Hayduke. This is the Sony a6500, and I have a Tamron 18 to 200 millimeter lens on there. And the microphone is a Rode Video Micro mic. This setup is unbelievably small and compact for the kind of quality images that I can get out of this thing. It's extremely versatile. It takes really high quality stills too, and I can get really nice time lapses with this camera. Shoots in 4K, I get really nice slow motion too. I can get 120 frames a second in 1080. The lens actually makes this camera a lot bulkier, but with that kind of zoom range, it's worth it for me. To go from 18 millimeters to 200 is pretty extreme, and on the long end, that 200 millimeter lens is really nice for shooting wildlife and stuff like that that's far away. So for me, it's worth it to carry kind of a bigger lens that has a really wide zoom range, because I also use the wide end too at 18 millimeters. That's really nice for time lapses and landscape photography, doing a lot of video work that's close up. So it's really nice to have a good versatile range of zoom all within one lens. I don't have to bring multiple lenses either. The main downside to this camera is the monitor, and it's like dusk right now. It's getting pretty dark out, so you can see it pretty well, but normally in bright sunlight, the monitor is almost useless. It's so dim. It's not very high quality either. I do like that you can flip the screen out like this. That's kind of nice. But it feels kind of flimsy, and it's just not a very good monitor. I always keep that histogram display on in the corner right there, and that tells me how bright my image is, so I don't have to rely on the brightness of the screen to see how bright the image looks. I can just see by the histogram to see if I'm getting the correct exposure and all that. The autofocus on this camera is extremely good, so luckily I don't have to use the monitor to tell if I'm in focus or not. I can actually just trust it, and that's been a first. I've never really had a camera that I can just trust the autofocus, so that's pretty nice. And since it's a mirrorless camera, I can use the viewfinder too, which is super helpful to make up for the bad monitor. And my tripod setup, This is something that I'm kind of proud of because I've gone through a lot of different tripods and I've never really been happy with any of them, but this one I'm pretty happy with. These are carbon fiber legs. It's definitely not the lightest tripod that you can get, but I think it's the best combination of a sturdy tripod and the lightest tripod that you can get. And it's also very versatile. I can pull these legs out and have them go at basically any angle that I want to. I could even set this up upside down if I wanted to. So that's really nice. I can set a good wide base if it's really windy. And then this is where the customization came in. So let's start with the video head. This is kind of a nice fluid video head, which is extremely small compared to most video heads. For them to have a smooth fluid pan motion like this usually requires a lot bigger tripod head, but this is the smallest one I could find, and I can get nice smooth pans out of this. But the mount that was on this video head wasn't the same mount that is on my camera clip. So in order to use the same tripod mount for the camera clip and my tripod, I actually took this plate right here. I actually took this from a different tripod head that I have that's made for still photography, and I had to kind of drill out a hole in the middle here, find a bolt that would fit in there, and I was able to screw this on pretty securely. So now I can use the same tripod head in this as I do in this. And that way I can always keep that tripod mount on my camera and switch between the two pretty easily. So there's definitely some flaws with this camera, and I wouldn't recommend it to everybody, but for the kind of stuff that I do, I've been really happy with it, just because it's so small. For a lot of hikers, it's probably overkill. It's more than they need. But if you're making a documentary, that's probably the most compact camera that you can get to make a high quality documentary. Some other drawbacks is the battery life isn't very good. The batteries are pretty small, and if you're filming long clips, the camera will overheat. So that could be a problem too. When I'm filming in 4K, if I'm going longer than usually 15 to 20 minutes, it starts to overheat, and it'll shut down soon after that, so you kind of have to be careful about that. On the underneath side of my top pouch, there's another pocket, and this is where I keep my water bags. These are just 1 liter water bags, and my water filter, the Sawyer squeeze filter. On the Hayduke, I carried 5 of these bags, and then I usually had 2 water bottles with me. So I usually had about a total of 6 liters of water carrying capacity, which is about as much water as I would ever want to carry. There were a couple times when I wish I had more, but 6 liters of water is a lot of weight to carry, so I always tried to make do with that, and usually I didn't need that much. I guess on an average day on the Hayduke, I'd probably have 3 liters of water. So going inside, I guess we'll start with the clothes. The typical puffy jacket, just a nice lightweight down jacket, and then a raincoat. I don't think I ever used the raincoat for rain on the Hayduke. But it was still kind of nice to have, because there were some times when it was really cold and this puffy jacket wasn't enough to keep me warm. So the raincoat actually works pretty good as a windbreaker, and I would wear that on top of the down jacket a few times. And that, I was usually still kind of cold, but it was just enough to keep me comfortable. Other than that, the only other clothes I had is basically what I'm wearing. I had these pants, I had a pair of shorts, 1 short sleeve shirt, and then a long sleeve shirt. I also had a hat and 2 pairs of socks, and that was all I had for the whole Hayduke. The Hayduke is kind of a hard trail to plan for as far as clothing, because the temperature fluctuations are so crazy. There were nights where my water froze, and then there were other days where it was over 100 degrees. And there was actually 2 nights in a row where one night it was 80 degrees all night, and then the next night it was 18 degrees in the morning. So there's a huge fluctuation that you have to plan for. And And that can add a lot of weight to your pack, so it's good to have things that are kind of multi-purpose. Next, this is my cooking setup. I'm noticing that a lot of thru-hikers aren't even cooking anymore. They're doing this cold soak thing where they will just carry like an empty peanut butter jar, and then maybe an hour before they get into camp they'll just put in some ramen noodles and some water and let it soak for an hour, and then by the time they get to camp it's ready to eat. But for me, I really like to have a warm meal at the end of the day. That really does something for my morale, and it's something I look forward to at the end of the day. And there's something just a lot more satisfying about a nice hot meal than some cold noodles. So this cooking setup really doesn't weigh very much either, so it's worth it to me. I just have this is a 1 liter pot. It's probably bigger than I need. I'd probably recommend something a little bit smaller, but this is just what I have. Got my fork in here. Usually I'm carrying a spoon, but I lost my spoon, so I have a fork right now. And then in here, this is actually my stove. This is literally just a cat food tin. Bought it for 50 cents. It's up to you what you want to do with the cat food. I just threw it out. But then you just take a hole punch and punch a bunch of holes around the edge, and then my fuel is denatured alcohol, which I don't have with me right now, but you can get that at any hardware store, or in most cases there's no hardware store, so a lot of times you have to go to a gas station and you get a bottle of heat, which is basically denatured alcohol with a few other things mixed in, and it's made for pouring into your gas tank in the winter to keep your gas line from freezing. It kind of evaporates the water out of your gas, but it actually works really good as fuel too. Make sure you get the yellow bottle though. The red bottle has a whole bunch of other additives in there, and it's going to leave a bunch of gross, grimy stuff on your stove and your pot. I made that mistake once. Next up, now we're getting into camera gear. I started the Hayduke with a drone, and after about 100 miles I realized that I didn't have enough room for the drone and food. I was about to start a 100-mile section, so I had to carry about 7 days worth of food, and I knew that there were going to be some long water carries in there, so I literally didn't have enough room for all that food and water and the drone, so I kind of had to make a choice between one or the other. And I guess food is more important, but I was pretty upset that I had to send the drone home. I actually have a nice case for this drone, but it's kind of bulky and sort of unnecessary, I guess. It adds a little bit of extra weight, so I kind of made it my own case. This is just a dry sack, and then the drone is in here. These are just some dividers that came with my other camera backpacks. They're Velcro, and they're nice and padded, and I just kind of shaped it into a form that would be good for protecting the drone. So I just stick that in there, and pretty much does the job of keeping the drone padded, and it's super lightweight. I've had this drone for about 3 years now. This is the DJI Mavic Pro. I don't really know what to say about this thing other than it just blows my mind. I can't believe how capable such a small little camera drone is. The arms fold out like this, so once it's folded up it's like a super small compact package, and it really doesn't weigh that much. And the video quality out of this thing is just unbelievable. It shoots in 4K, and it's super stable no matter how windy it is. It has a range of like 4 miles. I can fly so far away with this. And it's just really fun to use, and I've just been super impressed by how capable and reliable this thing is actually. If you're wondering, I've crashed it twice. The first time I crashed it, I cracked the gimbal plate a little bit. I had to send that in to get repaired, and the second time I crashed it, it was fine. I hit a tree and it just landed in the snow, so I just let it dry out and it was okay. This is the controller. I don't really do anything to protect this. It's pretty compact and pretty rugged too. But the controller is super nice because these things fold out, and then I just put my phone in here. And this is actually how I monitor the video feed. So I'm controlling it with the joysticks here, but then I'm monitoring the video feed with my phone, which is super handy. It's just another way to save weight because I'm multitasking with my phone, which I already have anyway. I started out with 4 batteries with the drone. Each battery lasts about 20 minutes, so that gives me about 80 minutes of flight time, which is a lot of time, but when I'm out there for a week at a time, I do have to be kind of careful about where and when I fly, because those batteries go by pretty quickly. Altogether, the whole drone package weighs about 4.5 pounds, which on the one hand, it's unbelievable that I can get that kind of quality aerial footage for 4.5 pounds. But on the other hand, 4.5 pounds is a lot of extra weight for a backpack. So for me it's worth it, but for most people it wouldn't be worth it. Since I bought this, they have come out with a smaller version of the Mavic. It's called the DJI Mavic Air, and if I was getting a drone today, that's probably what I would get. It's a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter, slightly less capable, but it's still really high quality, and to be honest, this is actually more than I need in most cases. So the Mavic Air is probably what I would get today if I got a drone. And I also have this pack of filters from Polar Pro. Comes with 2 ND filters and a circular polarizer. This is a charger for the drone batteries. One thing that's nice about this thing is that it has the 2 USB ports here too, so I can charge my drone batteries and charge other things all at the same time. And this is kind of a big heavy brick to be carrying around. It's not super practical for backpacking, but if I'm going to take the drone with me, I have to take this, so there's not much I can do about that. Now we'll get into, this is kind of everything I need for my camera. This is my SD card case. Again, for a lot of hikers, something like this is probably overkill, but I have a lot of SD cards and I need to keep them organized and safe all in one place, so this is actually really nice. It's waterproof and pretty rugged, so I don't really have to worry about damaging my cards. I've got a battery charger. One thing that's nice about the A6500 is that I can actually charge the batteries in the camera. I can just charge it through USB, which is super handy. I don't know why that hasn't been built into cameras earlier, because that really came in handy out on the trail a few times. But it's kind of nice to charge 2 batteries at once and still be able to use the camera. And speaking of charging batteries, that's always a really big issue on these thru hikes when you're out there for a long time, and especially for me when I'm using my camera so much, I am burning through batteries really fast. This is how big one of the A6500 batteries are. I was carrying 7 of these, but I was also able to charge these from my drone batteries, which is super nice. This is the drone battery. Even after I set my drone home, I kept 2 of these batteries just to charge stuff from. These are super powerful batteries and they last for a really long time. One thing that's really cool, this is what makes DJI such a cool company. They really thought of everything. It came with this adapter, so I can plug this into the drone battery, and now I have 2 USB ports that I can charge stuff from. So I could actually be hiking, plug in 2 batteries into this charger, plug it into the drone battery, and charge 2 batteries while I'm hiking and filming at the same time. So that was really handy, and on some of those longer sections I cycled through all 7 of my batteries 2 or 3 times. So that was really handy. This one drone battery will charge all 7 of those camera batteries. So that's pretty good. Now I could charge my phone and whatever else from it too. This is my kind of homemade filter pack. This came from a bigger filter pack that used to be like this size, and then there's another part that would fold over, but I just cut that off, put some Velcro on the sides, and made it a little bit smaller and more compact. I have a variable ND filter in here. This thing is super handy. With filmmaking, you want to keep your shutter speed kind of slow, because then you get a little bit of motion blur, and that kind of looks nice. It's more cinematic. So I tried to keep my shutter speed around 1/60th of a second. In order to do that, you have to let less light into the camera, and that's where this ND filter comes in. depending on how bright it is, I can kind of tune the filter to let in the right amount of light. This red filter, this is a circular polarizer. This takes the glare off of things, so when you're shooting water with kind of a white reflection on top, it'll cut through that. It also takes the glare off of plants and stuff like that, and it makes plants and trees look a lot greener. So that's kind of cool. And then this is just a solid ND filter. I'll usually use this for like long exposures when I'm shooting a waterfall or stuff like that. I usually just keep a whole bunch of these in the bottom of this bag and kind of all over the place. I'll have one of these microfiber cloths just in pockets randomly. I'll usually keep one in my shirt, usually one on the side, in here on my hip belt, and I just try to keep those handy. This thing is super nice too. We call it an octopus. The blue cord, this is just your USB, so you plug this in to charge stuff, and then all these ends are different USB connections. So I've got a micro USB, an iPhone, mini USB, and a USB-C. And at least for me, with all my different camera gear, everything takes different USB connections, and for charging things, this really comes in handy. And it cuts out on carrying a million different cords. And then I'll just have some AA's and AAA's and stuff like that in here for my headlamp and whatever else. Moving on to my other little dry sack. This is where I kept the big drone batteries. These things are pretty heavy, unless you need like a lot of power to charge camera batteries and stuff off of. This is pretty impractical. I know a lot of other thru hikers will carry more of a slim USB charging pack. And then I just kind of keep whatever little random stuff I have goes in here. So I've got some ibuprofen, headphones, pocket knife, lighter, chapstick, and there's usually other stuff in here too, just whatever else I need that I don't really want to get lost. Now we're at the backup stage of the filmmaking process. I shot the whole Hayduke movie in 4K, and that's a lot of footage and a lot of storage space that gets taken up. Even with that SD card wallet and 12 SD cards, I filled all of those up within probably 3 weeks on the trail, so I have to do something with all that footage. On my first thru hike, I was actually mailing home SD cards. My mom downloaded all of the footage and then mailed the cards ahead to the next town that I was going to be at. But that's a pretty risky move for a couple different reasons. Something could happen to the SD cards in the mail or whatever, and then the footage is gone. And my mom isn't the best with computers, so there's always something that could happen there with her trying to import all that footage. I gave her a nice detailed directions list on how to do it, and she actually did it all pretty well. But there's always a risk there whenever you're letting somebody else handle your footage. So I try to kind of keep that stuff with me. So for this hike I did something different. I kept all the footage with me the whole time. And to do that I have this thing. It's called a NAR box. I've kind of got mixed feelings about this thing. It's a really good idea. I just wish it worked better. This is the first version. They have version 2 out now, which I hope they fix a lot of the bugs, but I found this thing to be super buggy, and it was really frustrating at times. But I didn't lose any footage, and it all worked out in the end, so that's the important part. And when this thing is working, it's actually really cool. First of all, it's really rugged, and it's waterproof and everything, so I don't really have to worry about like keeping this safe. I can just throw this in my backpack. It's got these 2 slots, so a regular SD card slot and then a micro SD card slot, and then a USB 3 port for plugging in a hard drive, a USB 2 port for also importing stuff, and then another input for a USB 3, and this is how you charge it. So what this actually does is I turn this on, and then I have an app on my phone, and it connects through Wi-Fi, so I do all of the controlling through my phone on the app. And I can import footage into the NAR box. This one has 126 gigabytes of storage, and then I can kind of categorize everything and organize it all within the NAR box, and then that's my way of kind of offloading footage and storing it somewhere. But 126 gigs is not very much, so I bought another hard drive. This is a 2 terabyte drive, and all my footage was actually stored on here. I was just using the NAR box to import and then transfer it to the hard drive. It's a pretty slow process, and this is usually what I was doing all day when I was in town. Part of the problem is that I couldn't charge the NAR box and import footage at the same time. For some reason, I have to run the NAR box off battery power while I'm importing, which is a super big hassle, and that was causing a lot of problems in the beginning because I was trying to import while I was charging, and the NAR box kept browning out. What they call it. It wouldn't shut down completely, it would just freeze. So then I would have to start everything over. But eventually I figured out that you have to import while the NAR box is on battery power. The problem with that is I could only import like usually about 2 SD cards, and then I would have to charge the NAR box again, and it takes like 3 hours to charge. So when I had 10 or 12 SD cards to import, that was at least a whole day process, maybe 2 days. Because the NAR box was kind of glitchy, and there was actually one time early on in the trail when this Lacy Rugged hard drive just wiped itself completely for no reason. And I'm pretty sure it was because the NAR box was telling it to do something weird. And I was doing things wrong. I was importing while charging, and that kind of freaked out the NAR box, even though that shouldn't happen, I don't think. But after that happened, I was kind of freaked out, and I didn't want to keep all my footage in one place. So I ordered another one of these 2 terabyte drives, and I actually carried 2 of these for the whole trail. Everything that I imported onto one drive, I imported onto the other drive, so I had a perfect copy. So both drives had the exact same thing on them, but that way one drive could fail, and then I would still be able to have all my footage on the other drive. What I keep on this outside pouch, and here is kind of just like an all-purpose rag, except this thing's kind of special. It's one of those kind of like special microfiber cloths that you can get wet, and then you go like this. When you snap it, it actually makes it really cold. I don't really know what's going on there. The fabric must be woven in some sort of way that lets the water evaporate really quickly, and that actually makes it really cold, which at first I thought was just kind of like a gimmick that I wouldn't really use, but this thing actually really came in handy on the Hayduke Trail. Especially in the Grand Canyon once it started getting hot. I would get this wet and put it on my head and drape it over my neck like this, and just put my hat back on. And then this would protect the back of my neck from the sun, but it would also keep me nice and cool, because when you have something cool on the back of your neck like that, it kind of regulates your whole body temperature. And so that really helped in the Grand Canyon when it was really hot. But there were other places too, because it's like always windy in Utah. There's always dust swirling around in the air, and there were some dust storms when I was like breathing in dust for half a day. So in those cases I would just wrap this thing around my face, and that helped a lot too. And if you ever have to dry camera gear off or anything like that, it's just really handy to have a rag like this. And then toothpaste, toothbrush. I don't really have a reason for keeping that on the outside, it's just kind of convenient. And then paracord. This is another one of those like multi-purpose tools that doesn't really weigh anything, but it's really handy to have. On a lot of trails, it's handy because you have to hang your food in the tree to keep it away from bears. But on the Hayduke, that's not really an issue. But one thing that makes the Hayduke unique is that there's a lot of climbing involved. And a lot of those climbs, especially with my big heavy pack, you can't do that wearing a backpack. So I would have to climb up and then haul my backpack up on this paracord behind me once I got to the top. So something like this is definitely a necessity on a trail like the Hayduke. And then on this inside pouch in my backpack, that's where I keep my tent stakes I always just have a bag full of plastic bags. It's another thing that doesn't weigh anything, but plastic grocery bags are like the most universal tool that I've found out in the wilderness. These things really come in handy. This is my very minimalistic med kit. It's basically just some band-aids and some gauze. I think I've only ever used that once or twice. And toilet paper, pretty self-explanatory. Now we're just getting into the basic camping gear. Sleeping pad. This is just like a Coleman 3/4 length pad. So it doesn't go the whole length of my body, it stops like right about at my knees, because the rest of your legs don't really need a sleeping pad. So that's just kind of a way to save some weight and some bulk. As you can see with all these white dots, these are places where I've patched it. Definitely got a few holes in this thing on the Hayduke, but the patches have been holding up just fine, and I've been able to use this thing for a long time. I'm pretty happy with this sleeping pad. It's got a little bit of insulation in it, but then you also inflate it by blowing it up, and it actually keeps me pretty warm. And it's pretty comfortable. My tent is this is a tarp tent. I think it's called the Pro Trail 2. Super lightweight. This whole thing only weighs a pound. And the nice thing about this tent is that it doesn't use any poles. I use my trekking poles to hold this up, and 4 stakes, and that's all I need. So that's kind of a nice way to save some weight. Funny thing is, I got this right before the Hayduke, and I only ended up setting this up like 4 or 5 times on the entire trail. Because in the desert, it doesn't rain. And when it doesn't rain, there's kind of no need to set up your tent. So most nights I would just lay this out flat on the ground and then sleep on top of it. So it works pretty good as a ground tarp too. And I thought I'd be worried about like snakes and scorpions and stuff like that, like sleeping out in the open under the stars like that, but it didn't bother me at all. At the end of a long day, you're so tired, if you don't have to set up your tent, that's just one less thing to do, and that's a win in my book. And then the last thing I have in here is my sleeping bag. I always keep my sleeping bag in this white trash compactor bag. It's basically just a heavy-duty garbage bag. It's going to last a lot longer than a garbage bag. It won't rip as easily. And it's a really nice, lightweight way to keep your sleeping bag dry. My sleeping bag, this is a Chinese company called Aegis Max. They're relatively unknown, and their sleeping bags are like half the price of their competitors' bags, but I've been really impressed by this thing. I definitely took a gamble on this. I wasn't sure if it was going to be a piece of crap or if it was actually going to be nice, but for half the price, I'm very satisfied with this thing. This is a 20-degree bag, and for the Hayduke, I'd recommend 20-degree bag at your warmest, probably. Part of the problem with this sleeping bag was that I ordered it a little bit too late, and it ended up taking like 3 months to arrive. So I had already gotten through like half the Hayduke by the time the sleeping bag arrived. And I did the whole first half of the Hayduke with a 0-degree sleeping bag. And that was probably overkill in most cases, but there were some nights when it got really cold, and I was pretty glad that I had a 0-degree bag. So by the time that this arrived, I was in warmer areas, and this worked out pretty well. But there were still some cold nights. There was that one morning when it was 18 degrees, I had this 20-degree bag, and it kept me warm. So that's a pretty good test, because I found that most sleeping bags don't keep you warm down to the degree rating that they say. These are pretty typical. I think a lot of hikers have these Lakey trekking poles. I like how they break down like that. These were new when I started the Hayduke. They're pretty beat up now, but these are really solid poles. I'm sure they're going to last for a long time. and this is also how I hold my tent up. So multi-purpose tools. That's the big thing with through hiking. The more multi-purpose tools you have, the less tools you need. And that means the less weight you can carry. My hip belt, I just have this one pocket here. And in here I usually keep whatever maps I'm using for that day and a compass. Nothing special here, just a regular compass. And I'll keep like 2 or 3 sheets of paper that are my maps in here. And then I keep the rest of my maps in the top pouch, just so this is easy to get to. And I also have this kind of multi-purpose watch. I don't really care what time it is when I'm out on the trail. I usually consider there's 4 times when I'm hiking: morning, middle of the day, afternoon, and time to look for camp. Any more specific than that is just kind of unnecessary, I think. So I don't really use this for the time, but this watch has a thermometer and an altimeter on it, which is actually super helpful. I just like to know what temperature it is. It's kind of interesting for me. And the altimeter can be really helpful when you're navigating. If you don't know exactly where you are, it can be really helpful to know what altitude you're at, because then you can kind of rule things out that way. You can look at certain contour lines and know that you're at least somewhere along that contour line, and then you can start to match up features in the landscape based on that. So this thing has been pretty helpful too. As far as this pack, I've had this thing for all of my through hikes. I've gone through the Pacific Northwest Trail, across the UP on the North Country Trail, and now the Hayduke Trail on this thing, and countless overnight trips with it. This pack probably has, I don't know, over 3,000 miles on it, and it's holding up pretty well. I'm pretty impressed. And I've worn it so much that it's really shaped to my body, and it's really comfortable. This can be full with like 40 or 50 pounds worth of gear, and that's a lot of weight on your body, but the pack makes it as comfortable as 40 or 50 pounds can be. So I really like this thing. My next pack will definitely be smaller. I don't think I'll need another 75-liter pack. I'll just have to learn how to pack smaller. But there are a lot of times when I like having this much space, especially for what I do with all the extra camera gear that I'm carrying on a long 140-mile section. I have to carry a lot of food, and that takes up a lot of room, and there were plenty of times on the Hayduke when this thing was totally full. So I like having the room, and it doesn't have to be full all the time, so it's nice to have it. When I started the Hayduke, my base weight was about 30 pounds, and that is including a drone. So, and when I say 30-pound base weight, 10 of those pounds was camera gear. So 1/3 of my base weight is camera gear. And I know to a lot of people that's just gonna seem crazy, but for what I do, half the reason I'm out there is to make a movie, and that's where I get a lot of my enjoyment on these hikes. So for me, it's worth it to bring the camera gear. But that's about it for my Hayduke setup. This is a really versatile setup, and you can hike just about anywhere with this. Just about any kind of weather other than winter, I guess. But even some kind of mild winter situations you could get through on this. I'll be doing other pack breakdowns too for different types of hikes. Around here in the UP, I'm not doing very much long distance hiking. It's mostly just day trips and shorter one-night camping trips, and my pack setup changes a lot based on that. So I'll do some pack breakdowns for those pretty soon too. Let me know if you have any other questions or any other things you want to see in the comments below.